Our next question will be for our guest speaker, Minerva Ranjeet. First of all, thank you, Minerva Didi, for coming to speak to us today. Minerva Didi holds a Master's of Professional Studies degree, and she is a clinically licensed art therapist, as well as a nationally board certified art therapist. And she has extensive experience with mental health in immigrant communities. We're so grateful that you came here today to talk to us. So Minerva Didi, the question for you is the following. How does one society relate to and affect mental health? In other words, what is the community aspect, and in this case, we're talking about the Nepali community aspect of mental health?
Thank you, Zenith. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to discuss this really important topic. I've worked as a therapist for the past 5 years, and I even wrote my thesis on engaging South Asians in therapy. This was a really important topic for me because I have seen the underutilization of mental health services in our community. While working as a therapist, I've worked with very few South Asians, and it's not because we don't need therapy, it's because we just don't go. And so when I say mental health, what comes to mind? Is it therapy or being crazy or something's wrong with a person? And that's kind of common things that people think of. But for me, mental health is about wellness. Mental health is often seen as just mental illness, something to be ashamed of, a stigma. It's reasonable for someone to seek out a professional's help if they have physical pain, a broken bone, a chronic illness. Yet mental health issues are seen as things that can just be dealt with or pushed through. And I cannot discuss mental health in the Nepali community without first addressing the stigma associated with mental health. There is stigma around mental health, and it's not just unique to the Nepali community. Many cultures and societies have different stigmas around mental health. Here in America, people used to be institutionalized and essentially locked up in straitjackets. This is now an exaggerated image of being crazy, but it's rooted in history. In other cultures, they feel that their people have endured much worse. So whatever someone's going through, they should just power through their struggles and get over it. And I think this is one thing that I do see in our culture. For many of us, we either immigrated from Nepal or our parents did. We have been given this better life, an easier life with more opportunities, and we're always told we don't have it as bad as our family or as rough as our family back in Nepal. We live in America. We don't have to deal with load shedding, and we have reliable utilities. But one thing that we don't talk about is the struggles associated with being an immigrant. We have to learn a new language, learn a new culture, or sometimes live with two different cultures that sometimes are at odds with each other. And, sometimes we have to work on having equal access to job opportunities as our American counterparts. And just because we're here and because we have these opportunities doesn't take away from the value of mental health or the fact that we may be struggling with our mental health. And I know a lot of parents listening now worked so hard to provide for their family, maybe working multiple jobs or juggling work, school, and a family. And when you're working that hard, sometimes there's just no time to think about mental health. But that doesn't mean it's not there, it just isn't talked about. It's important to remember that everyone's feelings and experiences are valid. For people struggling with their mental health, it's easy to minimize their own experience, saying things as, oh, I don't have it that bad, or there are people who have it worse than I do. While those things may be true, that doesn't take away from that individual's experience. I always tell my clients, yeah, some people have it worse than you, but in the case of you and your wellness and your well-being, the only thing that matters is your experience, your feelings, and how you handle your struggle. Now, this may seem like a strange thing to say, especially in a Nepali community. We have a communal culture. What matters is the family and the community as a whole. This is what has helped our community be so strong and so connected. We are people who bond and find joy from connection with each other. Think about how hard this past holiday was when we couldn't have a huge party, because that's how we are. That's how we find joy. We find joy and meaning from being connected to each other in the family, in the community as a whole. Part of this communal aspect is that as an individual, what we do doesn't just affect us. It affects our whole family. So when one person does really well, it reflects well upon that family. But when someone does poorly, it also reflects upon the family. So someone who wants to seek out mental health services may not actually do so for fear that it would have others think that there was something wrong with them, but more importantly, that there was something wrong with the family, that the family did something wrong or the family couldn't support them. And mental health is not something that Nepali people typically feel comfortable talking about, especially with how it reflects on the family. And when you don't acknowledge something, there's no way to talk about it. If it doesn't have a name, how can you have a conversation about it? So here we are in this panel discussing mental health, and it is such an important topic that affects everyone. Everybody has mental health. Everyone has happiness, sadness, excitement, and that is all part of mental health. Mental health and mental illness do not just present itself as thoughts or feelings. Often, mental well-being correlates with physical symptoms throughout the body. When you're feeling depressed, you can feel more tired, you can lose your energy, be unmotivated, or have a hard time focusing. It can also show itself as stomach pains or headaches, and anxiety can show itself as shortness of breath or rapid heartbeat. Studies have shown that Nepali people will report somatic symptoms such as stomach pains, headaches, and tension, but they will not talk about other symptoms such as sadness, irritability, or lack of motivation. Studies also have shown that when discussing the topics with mental health within the Nepali community, South Asians and Nepali people are significantly less likely to recommend mental health services than their American counterparts. Now, some of you may be asking, why is it so important for us to seek out mental health services or be open to speaking about mental health? 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness, and 17% of youth in America, that's 6 to 17-year-olds, experience a mental health disorder. And in the US, 15% of Asian adults have a mental illness. But we have to remember that these numbers are only counting people who go and seek help. And in our community, we know that that's not really happening. Anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, agoraphobia, PTSD, OCD, dysthymia, these all seem like scary words. And some of the words have the word disorder in it, which makes it seem even scarier. These are all common diagnoses that people deal with, and it doesn't make them a bad person or defective. It's just the fact. I could have listed asthma, diabetes, hypertension, back pain, all conditions that people are either born with or develop in their lifetime. And there still isn't that same stigma attached to it the way those mental health conditions have it. And as a community, we're not going to get rid of stigma of mental health overnight. We're not just going to have this conversation and it will be cured. But the way to reduce stigma and to create a more open environment is to start having conversations and work on our own biases towards mental health. When we have these conversations with others, we are creating a space where it is okay to discuss these topics free of judgment. There are some simple ways of changing the way you engage in a conversation with someone to show you are open to listening to them judgment-free. Instead of saying, "What's wrong with you?" you could say, "You look upset. Do you want to talk about it?" Or instead of saying, "Oh, just try not to think about it," you can say, "I understand how hard that must be." And just remember, you don't have to fix anybody's problems or feelings. And it's very common for us to just want to make somebody feel better, make it all better, have them be happy. But sometimes just acknowledging that there's a problem and reminding that person that you're there for them is the best way to support them. In my research, I found that many South Asian youth have difficulty talking to their families about their own mental health. Some for fear of how their family would react, others not wanting to burden their family with their own struggle. So this is a call for both parents and kids to start having these conversations. Open up the dialogue and talk openly. The way that we're gonna make change starts with ourselves. We have to have these conversations with ourselves and our family and the people we know and make change within our community that way. And that way we can move forward. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Minerva Didi, for your insightful and very educative answer. I just want to speak to one point that you made, and that's about research, is the Nepali immigrant population right now. We're a fairly new population. If we think about other South Asian communities, like the Indian community, they had their diaspora in like the 80s. And so for us, we're having our peak of immigration right now. And so we're a fairly new population. And there's not much mental health research about us in the US. And so what you mentioned, that we need more research as well, I think is really, really important. As someone, I studied psychology, and so I know how important research is. I think that this is a good first step to ensuring that we have more resources to look for and to look towards when we discuss mental health.